So if linguistics is the science of how language works, and it can tell us, all of these patterns about how language is used in the wild, so to speak, then essentially we can take those findings and apply them to our design work in conversational AI and leverage it to be able to design a conversation that feels natural. So what I'm going to go through are the top 5 linguistic principles that underlie my approach to conversation design and also sort of push as the beating heart of conversation design at Salesforce. Now, as a songwriter and avid fan of pop music and pop music trivia, I couldn't resist framing these sort of top 5 insights around hit records. And what I'm going to take us through is essentially the 5 linguistic principles that I reference most often to design conversations that feel natural to users. So number 1, be descriptive. The reason why I chose this is because Ariana Grande is describing her lip gloss. And linguistically, it's important to describe what you're seeing with the language rather than prescribing your own impression or views about or opinions about the language. When folks refer to quote unquote proper or correct grammar, or if something is quote unquote grammatically correct, they're actually forcing their ideas of socially acceptable conversation on people. Remember, there is no right or wrong way to have a conversation. There are grammatical patterns that we practice as a society, yes, but no one variation of the grammar or variation of communicating in language is correct. They're all different variations of the language itself. Lastly, spelling is a farce. It's made up completely. It rarely represents the language in a fashion that is accurate to the sounds that we actually produce. So therefore, there's no such thing as a misspelling because, again, language is a practice. It evolves. Even when we compare spelling variations between what's in the dictionary for US American English and British English, there are slight variations. Is British English more correct than, or British English spelling more correct than American English spelling? It's relative. Same goes for things like yas or thru or just a u instead of you. There's no such thing as a misspelling because language evolves. Be open to all spelling variations and account for them when you train the bot to recognize user inputs. The way that we do that at Salesforce is by encouraging users to essentially put in all the different ways that customers can phrase something into the intent when they're training it. All right, hit number 2, be purposefully marked. Number 3, start with a verb. Number 4, use discourse markers. And the last recommendation is decide on a conversational style and stick to it.